Everyone, we are excited to have you with us today. Come on in, get ready for an exciting conversation with Bravely and ThinkHuman. Hello, mi familia, ¿cómo está? Welcome everyone across the world. I am Hakimia Jackson, CEO of Divinely Flowered, Global Executive Coach, and Bravely's own DEI Board Advisor. And today I will be your moderator. I'm dialing in from Atlanta, Georgia. Thank you so much for joining this growth experience, specifically on this topic of leading with equity, engaging your managers in company-wide D&I efforts. I would love to get to know you further because you're just not watching a webinar, you are a part of the experience. You know how it goes with me. That's right, your insight, your presence matters. It's vital to the success of this experience. In fact, throughout the next hour, I'll be asking you all, the webinar community, to interact, share resources, share your thoughts on the insights shared from the panelists. So let's get started. I need three things from you, okay? Share your name, where you're dialing in from, and also one word that resonates with you when you hear leading with equity. Is it accessibility? Is it fairness? What resonates with you? Welcome, Taylor from NC. I see you. Matthew from Southeast Florida, my Florida people. I'm originally from Tampa Bay. My heart goes out to all of my friends and family out there. Just know we are thankful for your presence here because I know you're probably worried about or concerned about your family, but we thank you so much for you being here with us today. I see you, Megan, from the Bay, even though I'm from the original Bay. Just kidding. Hello, Lauren. Hi, Steve, Karen, Rachel, Elizabeth. We are so happy to have you here with us. Fort Lauderdale, Fort Lauderdale, that's what I call it. I'm looking forward to seeing what comes up in this discussion, specifically how we can expand our awareness for ourselves, for our teams and organizations, so that we can connect on a stronger, more human level. Let's keep the momentum going in the chat. So go to the chat and let us know, what values are you seeking to gain from this webinar today, specifically pertaining to leading with equity. Hi, Scotty, Stephanie, belonging, yes. Humanity, thank you. Unity, Christine, I follow you. I'm with you on that. I love it. Authentic belonging. Amanda, understanding. Authenticity, Arva. Rose, belonging. These are all really great things. And so know that throughout this experience, we want you to make sure that you share some resources with one another, okay? Because we're gonna share and pour out into you. And so trust the principle of reciprocity. It goes a long way. There's so many valuable comments in the chat. Deeper empathy, thank you, Dom. Meaningful change. Let's all remember that this experience is only going to be as good as you put into it. So we're going to give you all the wisdom, right? We're going to share all these golden nuggets from these thought leaders here with us today, but we also need you to be a part of this experience. And just a quick reminder, if anyone wants the SHRM credit, the codes will be given to you at the end of the webinar. So yes, you need to stay planted in that seat because you're going to get some real juicy information today, and you're going to get credit for it. So before we dive deep into the conversation, I want to introduce our amazing partners, people who have poured into me in this experience. I'm so blessed and thankful for Bravely and ThinkHuman. They've been a part of my leadership journey for some time now. So I introduce you to none other than Meredith, founder and CEO of ThinkHuman, and my girl, Sarah Sheehan, co-founder and president of Bravely. Take it away, Meredith.
All right. You want me to just say a little bit about ThinkHuman?
Yes, please do.
Okay, great. Well, we are a leadership development and manager training organization, and we work with leaders of all levels, from frontline staff, managers, and executives in cohort-based manager training and leadership development programs. And what really matters to me is, like at the heart of it, our mission is to support all humans to bring out the best in ourselves and others, And our vision is a world where people honor each other and all beings. So our work through leadership development programs is how we do that, but that's really the world we're out to see. And that's why this conversation about belonging is so central to my heart. And at that, I turn it over to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Meredith. Is there a greater compliment to be had than to be called my girl by Hakimia Jackson? I'm not sure that there is. I'm so excited to be here today just because I have so much love and respect for everyone on this panel. And for those of you that aren't familiar with my company or me, I'm Sarah Sheehan, co-founder of Bravely. And we're a platform that connects employees to confidential coaching in the moments where they need it, across their journey that they experience at work. So that, can include things that are happening outside of work that are impacting whether or not they're engaged. It could be someone wanting development help or, just needing an ear to think more strategically or lead in a different way. And what's different about Bravely is that we are a needs-based coaching platform. And what I mean by that is that we're not programmatic in terms of, trying to cram down someone's throat what they need to go to coaching for. It's based on that employee and what's coming up for them in that moment. The other thing that is dramatically different about our approach is that we are trying to turn the traditional model of coaching on its head, where historically it was only offered to the most senior level executives in an organization. At Bravely, we go population wide. So we want to provide that equitable access to everyone at every level inside an organization. Which is definitely one of the reasons that I'm thrilled to be a part of this conversation, because it's so deeply embedded in our mission at Bravely.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And we're going to go to our additional panelists who are amazing and awesome as well. Please, starting with Tiffany, then Fatma, introduce yourselves.
Hi, everyone. I am Tiffany Richardson. I am the Director of People and Talent Acquisition here at Bravely. I'm thrilled to be here today in this conversation. It's deeply personal to me. And so I'm really excited for us to jump in and get all into everything. So thank you for having me. Fatima, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Fatima. I'm the head of community at ThinkHuman. Also super excited to be part of this conversation and to be with these people for this conversation. Really feels like a family reunion, and I'm really.
It does. Yes, I like that. Y'all at the family reunion, so I hope you're ready. Okay. As you can see, we have some amazing thought leaders here today. But most importantly, I want to let you know this, and I've experienced their energy authentically. These leaders here lead with their hearts when it comes to this topic that we're talking about today. It's one of the most talked about topics in America until things get uncomfortable, maybe even divisive. A growing number of organizations are committing to prioritizing DEIB in the workplace, and many have taken applaudable strides. We've become more conscious, reflective, and intentional with our efforts, but implementing long-lasting, meaningful change requires more than just awareness. Ask your talent and underrepresented groups, how have their experience been with this very topic of DEIB? I'm pretty sure the truth may be hard to swallow. DEIB requires embedding the very concept of diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging into the fabric of the organization, into the organization's DNA, and in your leadership DNA. That may mean challenging the current systems that promote white supremacy, yes, I said it, oppression and privilege, and moving into uncomfortable but necessary territory. Leading with equity requires you to critically interrogate all aspects of your identity. Questions like, who are you as a leader? What power, privilege, and biases do I hold? What am I guilty of? What should I embrace once I have denied the things, the oppressions that exist? Whom shall I connect with and celebrate? Well, guess what? These panelists are going to explore all of that today. They all have unique personal journeys within DEIB in the workplace. Panelists, please allow our community here to discover more about you, starting with Fatma. What has been your personal journey with DEIB in the workplace?
Thank you, Hakimia, although I feel like you said it all. I think my journey started 10 years ago when I moved to the United States. And I grew up in Tunisia. So for me, I lived for most of my life at that time being part of the dominant group. And then coming into the United States, the whole setting of relating to my world changed because now I'm not part of the dominant group anymore and I'm a minority. And it's so interesting to like when I was reflecting on this question, like the experiences that came up for me and how much I denied pieces of my identity in the workplace because I wanted to gain either influence or acceptance from authority. And I had workplaces where parts of me were not accepted, mostly my Muslim identity, because of like, for example, conversation around Ramadan or anything like that. And I actually really, really landed on the shame I was carrying around that part of my identity because of the rhetoric around Islam in the world. I remember having the conversation with you, Meredith, the first time a month before Ramadan. And Meredith had asked me like, so what's your plan for Ramadan? Like, what do you want to do? And for me to just have the conversation, I felt so uncomfortable. I was like, what is happening? Am I gonna be, is something bad is gonna happen to me? And it took actually the trust level of the relationship to like ease into it and even like have a Ramadan dinner, talk about my fasting, which is something that was really hard for me to even like bring up in the workplace. So I was reflecting on that this morning on that question. And I was like, oh my God, I had such a long journey around like shame around that identity and like being able to accept it and having the leadership to be able to accept it in the right conversations and to integrate it as a piece of myself that I can feel proud of actually.
Thank you so much for modeling like off rip this vulnerability. So you come in with it. And I hope the community's ready just to let you know that. But you just talked about the complexity of the journey, you know, and I appreciate you sharing.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing, Fatima. And, you know, I was thinking, you know, we're peeling back the onion here. We're going deep, right?
Yeah.
Layers. I love it. So, you know, for me, when I think about like where my journey in the workplace starts, I actually started to think about my experience in school. And so I grew up in Philly. I'm from Philly, in humble beginnings, right? And so I went to Syracuse University, where I went from being in a very Black like environment to a very non-Black, right? A very white environment, a very environment where there is a lot of like class involved. And I remember being there as a first generation college student and really struggling with that. And so that like really motivated me in my career to then want to go into education and want to be a part of the programs that are servicing students that were coming from backgrounds like myself. And so I joined an organization and I was really excited to be, you know, a part of like the mentoring program and connecting students to mentors who were passionate. And I remember looking within the program team, the folks on the, you know, front line, and there was representation there. And I remember being like, oh, this is great. But then when I looked at the organization and looked at the different levels within the organization, it was very quickly apparent to me that there was a lack of representation, that when it came to the curriculum that was being created for students, right? Like for the students that were from experiences like mine, that experience wasn't reflected in the curriculum. When it came to how we were evaluating who was going to be, you know, good for as a mentor, right? Were they asset or deficit based, and how they talked about students and their experiences and upbringings, like that was a gap, right? And so I started to think, you know, like, look, it's great to have representation on the front line, but we need to have representation throughout the entire organization. That is truly important. Is more than just like having it, you know, just for the students. And so that really ignited me into my own passion and moving away from programming and moving into talent acquisition. Because I was like, well, I'm gonna just go find all the people of color. I'm gonna bring them all in. You know, I'm gonna just do it. And then I was very quickly, you know, introduced to talent acquisition and all of the challenges that could come with a single hiring process and the bias and the relationship and the nepotism, right? And so all of that really started to fuel me into being like, okay, I need to integrate diversity, equity, inclusion into talent acquisition from the ground up, and really like in how we hire and how we train people and how we evaluate if someone's a great, you know, candidate, and like culture fit, right? Like reevaluating that, deconstructing that. And then also being able to then move into from there a DEI role. I did that. And then very quickly as a Black woman, I realized for me, that was too much of, for me, weight to carry. And I think that that was something that was pretty, you know, experimental for me, but I had no idea that like the weight of just, you know, my experience in the world as a Black woman, especially in America, and then tying that into my work, I'm like, I'm feeling it on both ends.
Both sides, yes.
I can do that. And so
Right.
it was a self-preservation move for me to go back into talent acquisition and then to say, I'm going to do what I can do to integrate it here and slowly build out to avoid some of that pressure. And so it's been, you know, a part of me, right, felt, you talk about shame that I felt like that was a weight that I didn't feel like I could carry, but also, right, like Audre Lorde talks about it, about like taking care of yourself and self-preservation being important. So I made that decision, and I'm really grateful for where I am now, but it continues to be a journey of learning and growth.
Right. It's a journey. It's a journey, not a destination, not a checkbox either. Thank you so much, Tiffany, for sharing.
I can share quickly my story, and then we can get into it. But my journey, and I do see this as a lifelong journey now. I don't know if I would have said that before, but I never actually think about it from this regard. But as I knew I was going to be asked this question. I grew up with a father who was an employment lawyer, and he represented mainly women and people of color. And that obviously had a huge impact on me. I lived half of the year alone with him. He like forced me to listen to all of his stories about his cases. I was often brought along. And so I grew up knowing about the inequity that existed. I had a lot of empathy and feelings about it. But, you know, because of my own privilege, I was able to like go to college and not think about it on a daily basis anymore. And I would say that that was true for the majority of my adulthood, you know, with the exception of being a woman, right? Which also, I think I've experienced a lot of negative things in the workplace associated with my gender. But it wasn't until I was in my 40s and I reconnected with an old friend of mine who then became my life partner. His name is Jesse, and he and I committed to one another, and he happens to be a Black man. And this just completely changed. Like I had already launched Bravely. We were already very committed to the equity because I'm a woman, my co-founder is a gay man. But my whole world changed when I entered into this relationship with Jesse. I started seeing the world through a completely different lens. And I wasn't always accepting of it, to be totally transparent. I think my initial reaction often is to explain away what he's perceiving. And then I had my daughter. And I think that I love Jesse with all my heart. But when I had Mabel, who will be 3 in November, it created almost like a sense of panic in me around how do I create the change that needs to happen in order for her to enter the workplace. I mean, you all should hear the questions that I'm asking preschools, like their brains are exploding when I'm coming in with, you know, questions around belonging and inclusion. And it's not always comfortable for me either. And I think, you know, that's my message to everyone today is that for me, like I have very strong reasons to be committed to this work, and it's still really difficult. And I still have a ton of bias. And so that's how I'm entering this conversation.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing that.
Over to you, Meredith.
All right. Let's see. I think for many of us, my intersectional identity really shaped my experience in the workplace. So my grandmother and grandfather were refugees in World War II, and their daughter was gassed at 3 years old, and mother, father, brother, everybody in the gas chambers, my personal grandparents made it out. And so I grew up in the shadow of that, and my grandparents were assimilated in Europe. So they felt like their identity was European, Polish, rather than Jewish first. So my grandmother raised me like, you don't get to say what's first. The world says it for you. So that was very much in my worldview coming up. And for whatever reason, how I internalized that was trying to assimilate and pass as much as I could. All the people around me that I drew close were non-Jews. And so that shaped me coming up into the world. And then when I would say really things started shifting over time, but really I would say most profoundly in the last 5 years, just getting much more so a clearer sense of all of my privilege and all those parts of my identity that are privileged and how those weigh into every interaction. Oh, I forgot one other thing that came before that, which is also, as the CEO of ThinkHuman, before I started this business, coming up in business, all the men that I had, all the people I had to model as executives were men. So what I learned to do was like, bring my man. Like, I can do that. I can hang with the boys. So my strategy was always like, how well can I pass, really? And in the last 5 years, got on a different journey about my own privilege, how that comes into play. And thanks to a DEI practitioner who I'm so grateful for, I was out to coffee with Willie Jackson, and Willie said to me at some point, like, yeah, we all got biases, like 5 years ago. It's like, we all have bias. You want to hear mine? Like, here. And he starts running through some of his. He's like, you go looking for yours, girl. Like, go find it and call me when you see things, like right when they happen. Call me. I'm going to cheer for you, celebrate you. And as I started doing that, and Willie really was a champion for me, I was like, oh man, there was some, and there was some. And I started to get excited rather than ashamed. So it wasn't like getting under the rug for me, but like could come into full view, and I could start to take some responsibility for that. And so in ThinkHuman, I started to see this big disconnect between, we are a company that is about all humans thriving, and that is so rooted, like how we were approaching that was so rooted in white supremacy, like through the lens of a white woman. And like, who were we really making sure was thriving and who was getting left out? So, we're on that journey now in terms of both as an organization and me personally, in terms of starting to shift representation at all levels, including the leadership team and the advisors that we have. But I would say most importantly, just like really leaning into the discomfort, because I know that without that, we're not doing it right. And so I'll stop there.
Meredith, oh, that was just, it touched my heart. That touched my heart. Because when you said, you thought about how much I can pass. I think about the reason on why leaders need to tell these stories, because a lot of leaders are thinking, well, how well can I pass? Just go ahead and pass this initiative and we can get on our day. And then the initiatives don't stick. It doesn't mature. But when we take that step back and deep dive into, no, I have to connect to this. I have to reveal it, and I have to celebrate it, and don't see it as shame anymore, because I know that I'm growing into this newfound awareness. That was powerful. And so I ask you all this. This is for everyone. How did you see things as a leader about 5 years ago in the industry pertaining to DEIB, and how do you see it now evolving and what it can be for the future?
I can start. I say the first thing is that 5 years ago, anything on this topic, we called it baking the broccoli into the pizza, like hide it in there. We got to put it in there into our leadership development programs, but like nobody's asking for it. They don't really want it. So you got to like bake it in so that people can't taste it, but they're still getting it. So that's one thing. And then the other is that I think DEIB initiatives 5 years ago were really so rooted in white supremacy. Sorry to say that there was like, let's get the white women some equity, and let's have white women paid fairly. Let's have white women have promotions. But there was really like who was in and who was out of who was getting affected by the predominant wave of DEI initiatives. And I think, I mean, this is an obvious thing to say, but I don't think it was until the murder of George Floyd that there really came a reckoning about who was getting excluded from that. And, I'll say it's still, I think, largely performative for many humans and organizations, but there's definitely new awareness and new vocabulary that just was not present 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I don't think the conversation has shifted, but I'm still, and again, because of my personal experience, I still don't see, I think companies are still always in the protection mode of if someone's surfacing that they're experiencing microaggressions or discrimination, it's very much like reactionary, like, how do we silently exit this and deal with it, rather than turning the mirror to oneself or one's organization and really asking the question, how did this happen? How do we prevent it from happening in the future? Like, I still think we are in the midst of moving towards that. I think there's definite progress being made, but we kind of default and sit back on just doing exactly what we've always done. And so, hopefully, like through conversations like this and, leadership really starting to build this into, everything in terms of like KPIs and OKRs, it starts to shift. But, comparing 5 years from now, I think there's, because of George Floyd, like you said, there's more conversation. And I think when you hire talent, like I know for us, hiring Tiffany, not because she's a Black woman, but because she's an expert in talent acquisition and has a background in DEIB, she has transformed the way that we hire, and she holds people accountable. And let me tell you, they don't like it sometimes. But she's brilliant at really helping them become more self-aware in their reactions and what's happening. So I think it's really about, like, again, starting over, hiring the right people and holding your organization accountable.
I mean, I agree with both of you, actually, Meredith and Sarah, although like I do feel like a slight difference in the way you both have a perspective on this. For me, I want to speak from the field, because like that, as an outsider view, like that's what I feel like most connected to. The feeling around these conversations, even like 5 years ago, was like, oh, we need to have it behind closed doors.
Yes.
Like we can't speak up because people would be maybe mad. They will not feel good, or like maybe will like annoy them with us wanting to have these conversations. And it felt like, I don't know if you remember, Meredith, our first fishbowl, like it felt as if we were doing this experiment behind very closed doors that we needed to keep and make safe and make sure. And we spent countless hours curating because we wanted to take care of the people and the space in a really safe way. But I also really appreciate how it feels different right now. Right now, I can talk about white supremacy and not feel like anybody is like thinking that I'm trying to challenge the status quo. They would just, at least, it feels at least as if I had the right to speak about this, and it was part of my experience, and we can just push the conversation forward from that. So I agree with both of you, and at the same time, I wanted to add like the feeling data of, at least it doesn't feel as uncomfortable and as challenging as it used to be.
Yeah, I would say that, I think that things have shifted from, 5 years ago, and and we still have a long ways to go. I do think, Fatima, you're correct. Like a lot of the conversations happened within people teams, closed doors, like whispers, like we need to do something. And I think that the expectation from the talent workforce, right? Like the people who are looking for companies has shifted, right? And so folks are asking in interviews about like, what are you doing about like diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in the phone interview with a recruiter, because people have an expectation now that companies are going to do more than what they've done, in the past, right? And so, and you need to have an answer for that. And if you don't, right, like the net is that's an answer as well to where the company is in terms of its like priorities here. And I think that the other thing I would add, right, is that like there is like more of a scarcity of being called out publicly, right? And so like I feel like one of the things that shifted was like now after George Floyd, folks are like, oh, I'm going to get called out publicly. There's going to be an impact on my bottom line for not upholding these values. Like consumers are smarter now. They're like, what are you doing in terms of your products, right? How are you elevating your products to be more, inclusive, right? I think one of we do identity-based matching as an option for folks here at Bravely. And that's something, right? It sends a small signal to people that like, we care about like you in terms of the intersectionality. And we want to make sure if you want that can exist for you. And so it has started to shift. I think that the like accountability still feels more like from the public and companies being called out. And I think, where I hope it goes is that it's not like about being called out, but it's like, I'm a broadcast, what we're going to do, like a Netflix with, strong Black lead, or some of the like kind of like ways in which they're highlighting what they're doing without, right? It's sending a message without sending a message. I know that's more complex in terms of Netflix and layoffs, and we can talk about that another time, but just saying an example, right, of like how companies now are starting to get on the forefront. And I think that's where it needs to continue to go to be proudful, of that.
Yeah, having that accountability, internally, so that we don't look performative, because I think it was Lindsay that said something about performative action. I know that your organizations here do a lot of work. How is the D&I efforts experience at your organization? How would you describe it?
You want to go first, Sarah?
In progress. I'm again, it's all about the journey. It's never ending. I think part of what's exciting and also challenging with what we do at Bravely is we've had to like take a step back and think about, so much of what's even being said in the chat. Like, I wish this conversation was 3 hours long, because I think it's, people get so uncomfortable with it. They want to like delay every conversation around.
Correct.
You've probably even experienced that with me, Hakimia.
A little bit.
This is all about like being transparent. So at Bravely, because we serve people and our mission is attached to equity, we really have to think about like, how does this get integrated into absolutely everything? Obviously, it starts with our people. It starts with our hiring process from the beginning, or how we even come out into the world, inviting people to join our organization, right? And then it's woven through everything down to, how someone experiences Bravely, the design of our product, the marketing of our product. And so that's a tall order. And then when we think about the leadership qualities, like I spoke before about, we recently this year hired a chief people officer, Katasha Harley, who was also a client of ours at the New York Times and Food 52, who's amazing.
Awesome.
And we're starting to think about like, how do we hold leaders accountable at our organization? But I actually think it's about, and someone has talked about this in the chat, like it starts with self-actualization and self-awareness, because so much of what happens in the workplace, and again, I've seen this through the experience of my partner, is under the radar. And I'm not defending like people that have, committed these acts, but sometimes I do think it's like on a subconscious level, or they're not acutely aware of, that they might be exclusionary in their practices, right? And so it's really helping people uncover what they might be doing that's leading to acts of exclusion in the workplace. And to me, like nothing can happen. Like you can build it into everything until like that opening happens at an individual level. Then it's like at a team level, leadership level, organizational level. Like we have to, and we can get more into this, but like we have to facilitate that at every step of the journey.
Yeah.
I would just quickly add, just in terms of like, some of the specific things that I want to highlight. And, Tasha has been amazing in leading, us in evolving how we look at DEI, integrating into all things for people. So when you look at like, for example, like our benefits, like we expanded like our benefits offerings for non-birthing parents to 12 weeks as well, right? And you think about like who has support in terms of like, supporting their children. Most two people, right, need to have the same amount. We want two people to have the same amount of time to ultimately support, right, the birthing parent in that process. And, in our website, we share representation data off the jump, right? And so people can come in and see, here's kind of what representation already looks like here at Bravely, right? We're honest. It's not all like, this is all of the data. We are like, hey, this is where we want to be, but it shows that we're committed to transparency, right? We've had like trainings around like biases as well. And so those are some of the examples, as well as a task force.
Yeah, and I want to just add, because Sarah said something, we've been in partnership for a while, and you talked about that delay, but one thing that I see you are true to is the transparency that Tiffany talks about. And you also had to go along the journey to discover your connection to the movement. And oftentimes that's forgotten or pushed to the side. It's not needed. So, the reality is, and I've said this on other DNI when I was a panelist, the majority doesn't have to focus on this. We're thankful that we have people who care about this. That's the reality from a Black lens. And so it does take work. Think about the times where things have been put in your face and you didn't feel like dealing with it. What was your response? It was only until it became serious for you, right? And so now we're saying, this is serious. We have to do something. And so the chat is off the chain. I love it. We have some questions here. But, what have you found most often gets in the way of having these tough conversations with your leaders at ThinkHuman and Bravely, or even with yourself?
Can I answer that in like what actually helped? Because that's what I feel present to. Like what helped in having these conversations. For me, I think what really helped is like the openness to feedback, and also having the tool to be able to deliver feedback. So considering that I think we have different people from different identities, and I think like this whole journey for us like started evolving 5 years ago, and it like even the form of it changed. So it was like very unstructured in the beginning. Meredith, like I want you to jump in if you feel like you want to like add something, but it was very unstructured in the beginning. We were having a lot of conversations, we were having a lot of coaching, we were having training, and then as soon as we started like with the years trying to like structure it and have like some kind of form where like we can practice this on bi-weekly basis, that's when it started being messy and tough emotionally for a lot of teammates. And if we did not have built that kind of relationships where we could actually trust that we could sit and have feedback conversations, I don't think the work would have been possible. So for me, it was like the positive intent and also the receptivity of feedback from our leaders. Like when we sit down and we actually want to deliver something mostly about DEI, or about like any kind of feedback conversation, to have like that level of receptivity where we can engage in a constructive conversation that can help us actually navigate what is happening on the DEI side, even if the structure was not looking good for us, to actually be able to switch it and change it and do what can work and think about it as like a long-term solution versus like, no, we need to meet at these certain times this frequently to make the work happen, or else it would not be happening. So I think like also the flexibility piece and like being gracious even about this work.
Yeah, I want to jump in on something just because I see people in the chat asking like for how to make things actionable. And I just want to say, Fatima, really struck me when you said about receiving feedback, that something we can do in our organizations totally separate and distinct from DEIB so that it feels much less confronting is actually developing people's ability to receive feedback and making it for people to make it safe for people to give them feedback and actionable when they get that feedback. And that kind of training doesn't have to be, we have received feedback trainings that have nothing to do with DEI, but the more muscle people build being able to stay in those conversations, because we're seeing feedback. It feels disgusting. It's like hard, but the greater our ability or capacity to hold that. So I just think that's such a great call out, Fatma. I also want to say, you asked Hakimia about what makes these conversations challenging. And a couple of things that occurred to me are, number one, Sarah, you said it, that like, we're still in progress. We're all still in progress. We're pioneering, like nobody knows how to do this, and we keep making mistakes and like falling down and skinning our face, and even sometimes creating harm, which is like, the opposite of what we're trying to do, and being willing to be responsible for like repairing the harm when it happens, like acknowledging the harm when it happens, is easy, and then being responsible for repairing it. And mostly, to me, it's just being willing to like expand ourselves to be in messiness. Like, it's not tied up in a bow, doesn't look beautiful, we don't look like we have our act together, and having that be okay. Another thing that I think makes these conversations challenging is that I think for many organizations, they think like, let's do the programs out there for our people. Let's do DEI initiatives for the people, which, that's great, but without facing that there's organizational work to do and looking at your policies and structures and all those things, but there's also inner work to do. And that if the leaders don't get engaged in that inner work, it's not like the other work is meaningless, but like those two things have to track together for real shift. And that we have to be kind of parallel tracking that work. So I don't think that an organization, their culture gets any better than that kind of capability or awareness and responsibility of that senior leaders, and having that group engaging in inner work. And so, we can't always make that happen quickly, but just taking those baby steps so that we are working on both tracks. And then the last, and I want to say something about that, because many people might be listening to that and be like, yeah, right, but how do we make that happen? And I just want to say, both to Fatma and Kristen Vivero is another person who just really pushed me for a long time, uncomfortably. And they were just like, yeah, I'm not going to take my foot off the pressure. And it may not feel good to you, Meredith, but I'm going to just like keep that pressure there. And that does make a difference for those people that are like, well, how do we start to move that needle? So I'm just very grateful to those people who have done that and do that with me. And then the last thing I want to say, and I'm taking a long time, sorry, is just that I think another thing that makes these conversations challenging is having leaders get clear about the role of OKRs and real measurable results that the business is accountable to. And that when it seems like, it's just on a to-do list somewhere buried, versus like a business deliverable that we must deliver on. And I think those conversations are hard, because it's like, man, we're headed into a potential big recession. We're trying to deal with X, Y, and Z. We got these challenges. This thing's on fire. And so challenging, I will certainly say for me, challenging to navigate that balance of like keeping the business healthy, which, if you don't keep the business healthy, nobody's got a job. So that's not good, but that's not easy to keep the business healthy and keep our eye on this ball. I think those conversations are messy and challenging and hard.
One thing I just want to say, you brought up like feedback, and I think we're often, as leaders, and the leaders are usually not super diverse, like we're trying to design these programs or strengthen our culture to be more inclusive, but we're not actually going to the source. And it reminds me of this conversation that I had recently with Reshma Sujani, and I just pulled up the quote. She said to me, we designed work for straight men with stay-at-home partners. We were talking about women in this conversation. If we design work for the most vulnerable among us, we can design work for everyone. And but what that makes me think about is that like, it's a tall order to ask an underrepresented minority to come forward and talk about their experience. Like, we put all this effort into setting up all the programs, and, we're pontificating this across the org, But if the culture actually doesn't support someone coming forward and sharing their experience or penalizes them for it, and by the way, they're all walking into the situation assuming that that's going to happen.
Right.
So it is your job to undo that, because there's systemic policies, practices, everything has brought them to the moment of feeling like, I'm not safe. I can't actually share my experience. I've lived this, where I'm like, this is so clearly wrong. Go talk to someone about it. But the experience for that human who's been in this situation their whole life is that I will be rejected. I will be penalized. This will not be accepted. And so those are the questions that you have to ask inside your organization around, what have we done differently to communicate that that is not the case here? Or what have our actions shown people? Because what often happens is that the person that comes forward gets a nice package and then they get time to go find another job. And then the person who's committed whatever infraction happened stays, and it stays a secret. And the opposite should be true, and it should be talked about.
Yep. And you were about to jump in, Fatma?
No, you good.
Okay, I was going to pull a community question from Yvonne. She's saying, what are ways that your companies have enabled managers to successfully manage and support underrepresented groups?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I've seen a number of things done. I think that like at Bravely, we've had training, right, as it relates to looking at our own biases, right, and having the conversations amongst each other about our biases and how they, impact us and how we show up. I think that there's still, right, like work to do when it comes to like leveling up our managers in particular, right? I think it's really important that like inclusive like leadership training is something that like, we're going to continue to, invest in as well. I think what I've also like seen happen at companies, right, as it relates to enabling managers is giving them training around like how to have these conversations, right? And so like understanding not only like their own biases, but practicing what it looks like to interrupt people in their bias and be interrupted with bias. And so it kind of goes back to some of the conversations that were happening before. It's like, not only do you need to get the initial training, but now let's practice actually receiving feedback. Let's practice giving feedback. Let's make having biases something that we recognize is across the board that we all are carrying with us. And then let's make addressing those biases something across the board that we're all being called into and being held accountable for. And so the minute that organizations can create a shared language as it relates to bias, as it relates to how we, support folks, it disarmors it and becomes like something that we all are in this together in this movement forward. And so I think that like continuing to, not only just have like an inclusive leadership training, but then having leaders practice difficult conversations, practice receiving and practice interrupting as a part of it is really crucial as well.
Couple thoughts I have are, number one, working with the people leaders on having a deeper understanding of power dynamics and taking responsibility for power dynamics, so that it's not just like, oh yeah, well, if somebody wants to say something, they should just speak up. It's like, okay, but there's a lot there, and you as a leader are responsible for what the psychological safety in your team feels like, and how power dynamics are managed within your team, and what kind of feedback you're going to get given that. And one of the things we've done in addition to training, and I think has been powerful for us, is having communication agreements that were co-created within the organization. Thank you very much, Fatima Gadira. And so those agreements are, about how we listen and how we speak, and also, and how we take our responsibility as it relates to power dynamics, and having recourse and support if you are somebody who, when you're in that position where you need to speak whatever it is, truth to power, have a conversation, whatever that is, and how you can get supported. So you're not just left like, all right, well, how am I going to go? And I think that training is one really crucial piece, but having alignment around behavioral expectations is really critical. And the last thing in terms of expectations is we're working right now on, as a collaborative exercise, defining what are the critical characteristics of an inclusive leader, not because we can't find a definition or as leaders we don't have one, but because it really matters to hear what matters within the organization in terms of what those key behaviors are, and then having that be something that every people leader is getting feedback about, like, these are the things that matter. How am I doing against those things? So those are a few thoughts for people leaders.
Thank you,
I
Meredith.
just want to add one more piece about like how even like the team agreement came about. I think it's very important to look at the quantitative data within an organization, and that's always like, it's comforting to have quantitative data always, but I think it's very important to also consider the qualitative data as well, because that actually informed a lot of our initiatives to be able to, this is like a conversation about how people feel. And this is a hard conversation. It can't be only translated through data. Like, you need to actually sit down with people and see how they're feeling, or have their leaders sit down with their teammates and report on like what is coming up for people. And that is actually what advised a lot of the team agreement, and even the initiatives that we wanted to implement at ThinkHuman in terms of training, support, having a sounding board, somebody helping with giving feedback, conversation, interrupting harm or anything like that. So I think it's very important to also have the focus groups and the interviews as part of the strategy in terms of like measuring what is happening from a DEIB perspective.
Mm-hmm. Hakimi, Tiffany mentioned this, but a big miss for us for a long time at Bravely was not creating the opportunity for people of different identities and races to be matched with a coach who shared either the intersection or a specific identity. And what we have found is that, you know, when we talk again about someone entering the workplace, like already feeling less confident in sharing potentially feedback, being able to go to a confidential resource like coaching in our case, and work with someone with the same shared identity. It doesn't mean they have the same lived experience, but at least they're starting from a place that feels more safe. Like, we've seen that be just transformative in terms of people's ability. Because, you know, for us, we want to help people, even if they're not willing to go forward, they at least have somewhere to talk through, like, how am I going to react to this? How am I going to show up? And we would never encourage anyone to go forward anyways, unless it was, you know, their wish. But, you know, just in thinking like, you know, even like that's part of like building the more inclusive product here. Like, that was something that we didn't do for some time. And then, you know, now we see how incredibly valuable that could be to a member of an underrepresented group.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I remember that discussion, and you and I talked about that, right? How you had feedback from both ends, and so it was tough to try to make that decision. Yeah.
I mean, some of our coaches actually, who were people of color, didn't want us to necessarily do it because they felt like they had an opportunity to coach a diverse set of individuals, and that if we introduced this, that they would only be coaching people like them. That hasn't ended up being the outcome, thankfully, but it was, again, just like inputs that if we hadn't asked for them, we would have just blindly gone in and made decisions without like hearing both sides. So making sure that, you know, it's just like when you're building a product, you go to your customer. When you're building a company, you go to your people.
Yep. Oh my gosh, look at the time. It's flown. And I want to make sure we practice that principle of reciprocity. So we're about to have a poll. Please connect with these amazing organizations here with us today. Okay. So while you're connecting, we're going to continue the conversation a little bit. We're towards the tail end, and you know how we do it. Provide some really good nuggets on how to move forward. So what initiatives do you think or hope teams will be focusing on in the next couple of years?
I'd like to see everyone implement coaching. I'm kidding, but I'd like to see, and I'll be really brief. Like, I think everything that we should do from this perspective, again, like starts foundationally with helping people create that self-awareness. And I do believe like coaching is one of those tools. It starts first with learning and helping people uncover, you know, what they might actually be doing that they hadn't thought of, and then helping them like really internalize that and change their behavior. And that takes dollars and investment, but without it, it's not going to happen.
Correct. Yeah.
I'll go. Yeah. So when I think about moving forward, I think like my hope is that everyone's looking at like the data, right? And so we're all being transparent about like, what is the representations within our company? We're looking at the mobility, right? In terms of, you know, who's moving up, who's getting promoted, who's, you know, who is, you know, leaving, right? And we're looking at that data and we're using that data in honest ways to make decisions about how we support our people, how we support our managers. You know, my hope is in the future that we're building diversity, equity, and inclusion into job descriptions. And so from no matter what your angle is within an organization, this is something that you're thinking about. You know, my hope is that like leaders are held accountable to it, right? In terms of their OKRs and their bonuses, right? Because I think that if we figure out how to connect it to bonuses, somehow things get done. So, you know, money motivates people, that's fine, right? But either way, right? Like I wanted to see it fully kind of like integrated into the metrics, integrated into the decision-making to drive, you know, action forward. And I think that the big piece about the individual journey is something that like, I would just hope, you know, morally that we all kind of like want to continue to look at ourselves and then show up as the best versions of ourselves on this journey with grace, of course.
Thank you, Tiffany. Lindsay says implementation and scalable strategies. Fiorella says allocating funds to the professional development. So thank you for sharing.
For me, it's a reflection question, and it is to reflect critically on how are we undermining safety as leaders within our own selves first, with other people, within our teams, and on the organizational level, because oppression can exist on all these levels.
Your question, I think, Hakimia, was how do we think it's going to evolve over the next few years? Was that your question? All right. Well, if the trend for what I think I see now continues, I think it's going to become less and less in the public conversation and in people's awareness, which is exactly not what we all want to have happen. But it seems to be that like in the absence of some tragedy, that it can kind of like fade to the background and people get like, whew, now we can focus on something else. And so for me, my intention for what I aim to, you know, both inside ThinkHuman and every client we touch is that how we're keeping the conversation alive is in our business OKRs. Because I feel like no matter what step we're taking, however small, if every quarter or however you do your OKRs annually, you are committing to a step, every one of those steps will keep us in action.
Continue to take action. It's
with
time to do
accountability to OKRs, because action in the absence of accountability doesn't get us that far.
Yes, that accountability is huge. Thank you all so much for connecting with us today. You gave us your time, and I hope that you felt as though you received something in return. And so know this is what you are going to get when you are connected to these amazing partners. Be sure to capture your SHRM credits so that you could make sure you get the credits that you deserve. We thank you again for this opportunity to share and connect and build community with each and every one of you. Bye.